Okay, good evening. I'm Donna Murphy, lead organizer of Braver Angels, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's discussion of the 2020 documentary Trumphobia, What Both Sides Fear, which will be about 75 minutes long. For some of you, this will be your first Braver Angels event, and for others, it may be your 20th. All of our events contribute toward our mission of building a house united by enabling people not to change their minds about the issues, but to change their minds about each other. As Abraham Lincoln said, we are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. We are thrilled to have with us tonight the film's director, Carolina Sosa. Carolina was born in Uruguay, and actually she's joining us from Uruguay tonight. And she holds a BA in communications. She also lived in Argentina, Mexico, and recently in Los Angeles, where she completed a master's degree in documentary filmmaking. She has been directing and producing documentaries for the last 9 years in different countries. She is a Fulbright scholar, and her work has been screened in many film festivals and received awards. Her first featured documentary is Trumphobia, What Both Sides Fear, which received an award from the Social Impact Awards and has also been selected in festivals in Chicago, LA, Ohio, North Carolina, and Canada. She is also the CEO of Okurelo, an organization that adapts movies for blind and deaf people and works freelance as a video editor and producer. Our facilitator this evening is Dee Endelman. Dee Endelman worked for over 40 years in the people side of business as an HR executive, group facilitator, teacher, and management coach. She has been moderating Braver Angels workshops since 2017 and participates in training new moderators. Helping us behind the scenes tonight are Janet Sedgley and Luke Phillips. We couldn't put on this event tonight without their assistance as Zoom event managers. I'll now briefly go over our agenda. First, Dee Endelman will present our Braver Angels ground rules. She will then interview film director Carolina Sosa for about 10 minutes. After that, you will move into breakout rooms for a 15-minute discussion of select questions. Once you return to the main room, people will be able to ask some questions of the director and then a whole Q&A session. And with that, over to you, Dee.
Great. Thank you, Donna. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm going to share my screen and just review our ground rules. We will be having conversations tonight, both in the breakout room and in the main room. So those of you who have been to other Braver Angels workshops, you're probably familiar with these ground rules. As in all Braver Angels venues, we're here to understand others and to explain our views, not to convince others to change their mind. This is sort of a core belief. We're not here to try to talk anybody out of what they think. We each speak for ourselves and not try to speak or represent any other group, just ourselves. We speak for ourselves. We stick to the spirit of the activity designed for each stage of the conversation. For example, if the topic is what we learned from watching the film, that's what we do, even if it means resisting the urge to explain our own political views. We're talking about this is all about learning. Otherwise, it's the standard stuff we all know, taking turns, not interrupting, listening to everyone, and giving opportunities for quieter group members to speak, etc. So I am going to stop sharing the screen and just check in with you folks. Is it okay if I, as the facilitator, gently remind people if they happen to get off course with these ground rules? Anybody have a problem with that? No? Yeah, don't see anybody jumping up and down saying no. So I think we're good. Thank you.
Dee, I have a question.
Sure.
Is it possible that I could be the exception to those rules when my wonderful, beautiful thoughts come out?
Sorry, Luke.
Darn. Okay, I will submit to them. Thank you.
If you go against the ground rules, we got to call. We got to do something gently, but we'll do it. Okay. Thank you. So we're going to spend a little time before you. I'm getting a request that the meeting norms and agreements be put in the chat room. I don't know, Janet, is that something you can do? I don't know if you can, but
yep,
it's on my.
I can do that.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to start out by giving Carolina a little time to speak with us. And we decided I would ask a few questions. She would go wherever she wants with those questions. So my first question, Carolina, is could you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your personal background, as well as your background as a director? What would you like to tell us?
Well, hi everyone, first of all, and thank you all for coming. And thank you, Braver Angels, for doing this with me. As Donna said, I was born in Uruguay, which is a tiny country in South America. And I lived in California for 3 years. And I was under a Fulbright scholarship there, doing my master's degree in documentary filmmaking. And the last year of the master, I needed to find a topic for my thesis. So Trump got elected during that moment, and I needed to make a decision of a topic that I would want to use for my thesis. And I realized that when Trump got elected, since I was living in California, which is a very liberal blue state, most of the people that I was hanging out with, my friends, were very shocked and surprised by the results. So I wanted, and I also saw like the fear and like the uncertainties that they had, all these concerns about the future of the country. But at the same time, I noticed that if he got elected, clearly there was millions of other people that had different concerns and different fears and different perspectives that were different from the people that I was next to, that I was so curious to know about them as well. And I realized that there was a lot of tension and a lot of hate crimes around this moment. There was a spike, but if you guys watch the movie, you know that there's a spike in hate crimes when he gets elected. So I started filming right away when he got elected, and I realized that I wanted to take this as a topic for my thesis because I wanted to do something that it was meaningful, that had an impact. Since I was going to take so much time to just focus on one topic, I didn't just want to do something easy or fast just to get the degree. I wanted to do something that that I could use not only during my career doing the master's, but I can do it later, because that's what happened. Once I finished for the thesis, I only did the first 20 minutes of the film. Then once I graduated, I kept working for a few more years to make the whole it's 70 minutes now, but the first cut was 90 minutes. It was longer. And basically that's how I got to the point of making the film. And more about my background, Donna said a bit. I also did a bachelor's degree in communication, and I work as an editor and video producer for other people's documentaries and other audiovisual media.
Thanks, Carolina. So you talked a little bit about what inspired you to make this film. And I'd also like to ask you, so could you tell us some things about what happened when you actually did make the film? Any kind of interesting tidbits about the making of the film, or the people you met, or things that you learned?
Well, I learned a lot, to be honest. In the process of hearing so many different opinions across the country and seeing the conflict from many sides, I learned something that is a bit harsh, but I think that everybody is biased in their own way. For example, before I made the film, I also knew that we all have our own opinions, but there were some people that were a bit crazy or ignorant or stupid in a way that I don't want to say those words, but you're like, how can they think this way? And once I started to listen to them and really listen to them, not just trying to impose my own opinion on them, trying to convince them. No, I just left aside all my opinions and just listened to them. I really understood their concerns, and I saw the same issue from a different perspective. And it didn't change my point of view, but it did change it changed the way I thought about them, which is really important in order to keep working with that person. If we want to keep unity and work together for the same civil goal of the city, of the country, or whatever we are in, then we need to work together. And another thing that happened, it was that I saw potential friends in those people. Because if you take aside all those political ideas that they may have, they are humans and they have other things that I do have in common with. You just have to find them if you take aside those things. And when that happened to me, I wanted to make a film that could at least show or try to do the same thing for others. So if you like inspire the people to keep talking to the other side and to keep finding common ground that you can relate and not just think them as, like I said, stupid or demon or evil people at all, but just to see that they're humans and there's deep inside, beside that political views that they have, you do have some other connections if you try to find them that perhaps that makes you way more closer to them than you ever thought that you could be.
Thank you. Well, and actually that kind of almost answers my third question. My third question was, what do you hope that this film inspires in other people?
I wanted to say sorry if my English is not the best. I always say it because sometimes
Carolina, your English is fabulous.
Okay, but I start speaking and then I mix some words, so perhaps I can make some mistakes. So I know for a lot of the movie, it's so chaotic, it's so much screaming, and so many insults and so many people fighting, and it can create or generate horror in other people. Like you don't get a good feeling until the end, right? When you see that there's some sort of possible way of solution of trying to talk to the other side and trying to find what I was saying before. So I don't want to provoke that despairment or like desperation. I don't want to do that, but I do want to show what the reality is on both sides. So I needed to show the problem and the conflict, because if you just don't take it for granted and you just don't see it, it's naive. So you have to show what the real circumstances are. But then at the end, I wanted to show that if you try to, like I said before, listen and to really talk to the other person and make sure that person understands you and then you understand them, then there's a way that we can try to move forward and breach the divide somehow. Because I believe in democracy. I don't think democracy, like Churchill said once, it's like the best system, but it's like, I mean, it is the best that we have so far. And it works by majority, I know, and some people, it's unfair for some people, but it tends to be fair for most of the people. But we do, in that situation, we cannot forget about those people that still think that some things are unfair. You still have to try to work with them to reach that separation that you have from them. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, well, that's,
Sorry
you know, Caroline, it sounds a lot like a braver angel things to say.
Great.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this is this is the way we clap. And
I like it. It's like deaf people clap.
Okay, so now it's going to be time for the rest of you to talk to each other and then come back, and we'll come back and have a general conversation. In a few minutes, we're going to put you into breakout rooms. So let me share my screen and we'll talk a little bit about breakout rooms. So you're going to be placed into a breakout room with 3 or 4 other people. And we're actually running a little bit ahead. So you'll have 15 minutes or so, maybe 20 minutes, to talk about the following 2 questions. What were some of the most surprising and important things you learned from this film? What were your ahas or things you hadn't realized before? What were your learnings? And then secondly, what questions would you like to ask Carolina about the making of the film, about the people she met, about other films she's made, about what other things she learned, anything that you'd like to ask her? Let's please make sure that each group member gets at least 2 minutes to speak about what they learned. So this should be plenty of time to do that, and share some questions you think you'd like to ask Carolina. And then when you return to the main room, we're going to ask you to chat your questions for Carolina into the chat box while we have a conversation and hear about some of the things you talked about in your group, what you learned from the film. Okay, Janet, will take us to breakout. So, by the way, I want to tell everyone that we have actually one of the participants in the film with us tonight, Edwin Ruth from the Empathy Project. Edwin, you want to wave to everybody? Where is he? There he is. Hi, Edwin. And Edwin actually, we just learned, was the person who suggested Carolina check out Braver Angels. So thank you, Edwin.
Hmm.
Okay, so what we'd like to do now is if folks could just start chatting questions they have for Carolina, and I guess or Edwin at this point, into the chat box. That would be great so that we can put those questions together. So any questions you have, just chat it into the chat box to everyone, chat to everyone. And while people are doing that, I would love for folks to tell us a little bit about what you learned, what was interesting, important, aha, and or things that your group talked about that you thought were really interesting about the film. So please raise your hand and we'll keep an eye out for, Luke, if you can help me keep an eye out for people who have their hands raised, that'd be great. So talk a little bit about what you learned while we're putting questions in the chat box. So it looks like we've got Rita, Mike, and then Rich. Rita, unmute, please.
Sorry, thank you so much. I really enjoyed my group, and I found out that I was probably maybe one of the only Trump supporters in the room, but they were all so kind and really wonderful. But something that I hope that I communicated to them when I heard what they had to say, I wanted them to understand that while my vote went for Trump, I personally had a lot of trouble with him myself, some of his personality, but something that I heard that it was so encouraging was the ladies talked about how they wanted to understand themselves and why they had allowed one man to bring out some of the stuff in them that he had. And that is exactly, that was so encouraging to hear, because I try to be a thinking person. I try to look at all sides, and I was always getting in trouble with both sides. So I just really appreciated hearing from these ladies that the film helped them to take a deeper look at, their own personal beliefs and actions. So thank you.
Thank you. And Ruth, let me ask you, was there anything particular in the film that struck you or that you really felt like, wow, that was a new one? I didn't know that. Anything kind of, oh.
I'm sorry, who were you talking to?
I'm sorry, I said Ruth, I meant Rita.
That's
sorry.
Okay. My middle name, believe it or not, my middle name is Ruth.
Oh my God.
Isn't that crazy? It happens to me quite often. Actually, oh gosh, this is going to sound terrible, but I have always been a person that tried to understand individuals as opposed to groups. Mm-hmm. It's just part of my upbringing and my belief that each individual is so individually sacred and special. And I have experienced that you cannot know a person unless you really know them. And so for me, I was just thrilled to see this because I thought it was such a balanced perspective. And one of the ladies in our group, Mary, I believe, had made mention that she really loved the name Trumphobia as opposed to what's the other crazy one? I can't remember it now, but Trumphobia is so much better than what's the other one that they used to talk. What was it called?
Trump derangement syndrome.
Yes, that's it. Yes, thank you. And I always thought that was so ugly. And but there was a part of me that said, it seems like that sometimes, but like Mary said, Trumphobia is a great because it encompasses both sides.
Thanks,
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you. So let's hear from Rich and then Mike Ashbury. Rich, what did you learn?
There were two things that struck me. First, we tend to see protests from a distance. And I thought it was great to really get down on a street level and to hear some of the conversations that were going back and forth. So that I thought was particularly engaging in the film. The other thing that struck me was first of all, how persecuted some of the Trump supporters felt. But additionally, there were a few times, and I'm sure it was probably deliberate, but there were a few times where you wouldn't have known necessarily whether someone was pro-Trump or anti-Trump. Their comments were almost identical. And I think that's one of the things that we tend to lose sight of when we're looking from a distance. Very often across the divide, we feel very similarly, even though we might have different conclusions about something. And I thought that came across especially well in the film.
Thank you so much. I really like that thought. I'm glad you see it that way. And I was, yeah, keep going. If
Sure.
No, that's okay. No, that's great. Thanks, Carolina, for your feedback, team. Mike, what something you learned?
I was just gonna say, if you have any criticism, like I said before, it doesn't have to be great comments as well. It's like you can say horrible things about it, and I'm always glad to hear all of those comments as well.
I can't really say I have any horrible things, Caroline. So I'm sorry to disappoint you.
That's fine.
I just have a question about this empathy tent. And first of all, how did you run into them? Was it something, I mean, did they show up elsewhere? Are they elsewhere? Who are they? And I want to hear from this guy so that we can get a chapter here in Albany.
Okay, so it sounds like we're making a natural transition into asking the questions. So Mike, we'll let your question be the first question. And is it okay if Edwin, would you mind answering that question? Tell us a little bit about the empathy tent.
The empathy tent is, we set up this tent here in Berkeley between the left, when the left and right would come out and, have these battles of Berkeley, and we would offer listening to both sides. And we have taken it to places like Sacramento and Los Angeles, but maybe Carolina can share how she found us, how it ran into us. I think that might be an interesting story.
First I started filming for a long time, and it was all conflict and conflict and conflict. And I knew as a storyteller, you need to have not a happy ending, but at least a bit of hope in some part of the film. And it was very difficult for me to find it naturally. So I had it in my mind. I was going to force it. I was going to be the organizer and bring people from both sides and shoot it as in a studio or something, and organize it myself. I was like, I had no option. That was my only way of doing this. But then I was in Berkeley, and they told me, the Trump supporters actually told me, we're going to Berkeley because there's going to be a protest there and it's going to get really violent. You should come. And I was like, okay, well, let's go. And I went by myself, to be honest. And I was using the equipment from my school, and because it was part of the thesis. And they didn't know I was going to a protest that was going to be violent by myself up north of California, but I just took the chance and went there. And in the middle of all the chaos and everybody, it's like the last part of the movie where, and you can see it right before Edwin comes in, where all the people are bleeding and they're throwing gas bombs and everybody's like being really, I've never seen that much of political aggression in my life. I know I come from Uruguay, which dictatorships 20 years ago were something, but that was my parents' generation, not mine. So I've never experienced that type of violence, because just what you think politically, right? And so I was there, and in the middle of all this chaos, I see this tent. And then I see Edwin giving little pieces of candy to people and bring them to this tent and having them speak. And it was so ridiculous in a way, but amazing, because it was like everybody was fighting and who's gonna stop and come and talk to this tent, and they are in danger. Everybody, I was trying to protect myself because they were throwing glass and throwing all this stuff. And the minute I saw him, and I was actually, you saw it because I was filming and I used that part in the film. I was like, oh my God, he's the one I need for my film. I need to do this because this is exactly what I want to do. I don't want it to make in a studio and I be the moderator, or I was going to hire a moderator, actually, somebody that was that was a specialist in non-violence communication. But he was there, and I was like, okay, you have to be in my film. So I filmed it in Berkeley, but then I realized I needed something with more cameras and having like more produced. So I brought him from Berkeley to Los Angeles, and I arranged it to put the empathy tent where you see it, which is the impeachment march, one of the marches that they did in LA. And I decided to do that one because I knew also Trump supporters were going to be there, because sometimes people protest, but they don't go, like they don't, like it's a right protest, so all the people from the right go, and if it's a left protest, then all the people from the left, but not necessarily they confront each other. But I knew that in this one there were a lot of Trump supporters that were going to be there, even though it was organized by the left. So that's why Edwin came in, and after that he's like a really part of this film and all this movement that we have. If you go to our website, like all this at the end, let'slisten.com, you can either go by let'slisten.com or Trumphobiamovie.com. It takes you to the same website. And we have this project. We want to take the empathy tent to other places as well. It would be great if I was going to apply for grants to do this social impact campaign with the film. The same thing we're doing here, but also with the empathy tent, and have people go to different universities. But the pandemic came in, so there was no school, everything locked down, so we couldn't do any of that. So right now, if they want to know anything else about the empathy tent, you should ask Edwin.
Great. Thanks, Carolina. So we have a ton of questions here, and I know you're
Yes.
not going to be able to answer all of them. How do you want to do this? Do you want the person who asked the question? I can just call out the name and.
I mean,
are
I
there
can read it,
particular
and I'm
ones?
just gonna go by order. So and let's see which ones we have time for them, but I don't want to make the choice of which one. So I think
Okay.
the first one that I have is,
Rich Kennedy had one.
Yeah.
I know how difficult it is to get a film made, and I wonder how you get funding for the film. I think that's the first question. If anybody's, is that the first question? Yes, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna answer quickly just to try to answer as many questions as possible. This film, actually, I mostly self-funded. I for the first years, I was using the equipment from the school, like I said, and luckily I was under a Fulbright scholarship. So the scholarship was paying for all my living expenses in LA. So I didn't have to work while I was doing this. But after I graduated and the film, I had to make it longer. I had to find a job because the scholarship ended. And while I was working 8 hours at a company, driving back and forward 2 hours more. And when I got home, I was editing the movie. So I didn't sleep for a long time. And then we applied for a grant. We got a grant from Rogovi Foundation in New York that helped us to do the post-production. And then we did a crowdfunding campaign. So I don't know if you know what it is, but it's something like Kickstarter. So you put your project, and everybody that is interested in the project collaborates with $1, $100, $1,000. And after that, we got some money, and then the rest, it was all my savings and the executive producer, which is at the time was my boyfriend. And he and I believed in the idea of this film. So he helped me because we traveled a lot through the film. So he helped with all the trips and all that. And then I did all the other parts. So basically that. Would I do it again independently? Probably not. Did I enjoy not having to answer to anybody else? Because when you usually have an investor or a production company that it's bigger, then they have the final decisions over your story most of the times. In this case, I didn't. And that's a happy thing, but it was very hard to do it on my own. So that's the first question. Where were you? Sorry, because it's hard for me to read.
Hey, Carolina, why don't I read the question out loud to you? Okay.
That would be great, because
So Carrie Freiberg asks, what were your original questions starting out? What were the questions you had in your mind when you started this film?
First one, why Trump supporters voted for him? Because the most I was seeing on the media was the opposite, like all the criticism towards him, and especially in California, I didn't know people that voted for him. So I was just curious to know why they voted for him, because I knew what I was seeing on the media was not enough. There was millions of other concerns and fears that they had that they were not being shown. That I think I have a background in journalism, so I like to, I know the truth could be a bit, how do you say it? But Like everybody can have their own perspective about the truth in a way, but there are some facts and some things that you can follow that gives you a better perspective of that reality. And so I was only receiving one, and I needed to have the other one. So that was like my original questions. And then I wanted to know, once I found out about the hate crimes, I wanted to know if it was only towards the left or it was also towards the right. And so I found out that it was towards the right as well. So that was one of the original questions. Then I see, is the empathy tent elsewhere? And then Edwin just answered. So go ahead, Dee.
So the next one, after Mike's question about the empathy tent, is Josh Gutwill asks, were there any people you interacted with that you couldn't empathize with? And if so, what got in the way?
Good question. I think I was able to empathize. Oh, I'm going to tell you a story. Well, sorry. Empathize with everybody. Did I agree with everybody? No, clearly not. But I could empathize with everybody. For us, as a story, I went to North Carolina on December 3rd of 2016, the KKK was doing a Trump parade to celebrate Trump's victory. And I was there in North Carolina. And I found out, so I'm seeing this example to at what point I'm able to talk to somebody, which I think it's completely different from me, right? Somebody, I don't know what your beliefs are, but I think the KKK, has this history of being violent and aggressive, and it has a really bad history. So I contacted them because I wanted to know their opinion as well. I wanted to understand how they see it as a leader that they can identify with, when there are some things about the KKK that don't really go along with what Trump says as well. So there were some contradictions there that I wanted to know. So I found out that the leader of the KKK, they don't call themselves the KKK now. They call it's a Dark Knights. It's called. And the leader had an incident, and he stabbed one of the other members, and so there was a crime. And you can find the police records of where the address of those people are. So I found out the address of that person. He lived in the middle of nowhere in North Carolina, and I went to his house just to see what his opinion was. He didn't answer me, but I went there because I wasn't scared or afraid. I was like, I want to know even the most radical and like completely different point of view I have. I want to know how and why they think the way they do without judging at first, clearly.
Wow. Thank you. So the next question is actually another one about research questions. So if you don't mind, Angela will consider that one answered. And Amy Akashi asks, Carolina, what was your biggest surprise?
That's what I've seen, right? Because I still like what I see is just a fraction. There's much more information, much things happening across the country. But from my experience, what I was able to record, that there were a lot of aggression from the left to the right. I had in my mind there was more, it was both, right? Both aggressive, but it was usually more aggression towards the minorities and to the more liberal kind of side. And what I realized about the film is that I saw a lot of aggression from the left to the right, more than what I was expecting. And that's why I really got shocked and made me doubt about what you see in the media, for example. Like you don't see those cases, but it happens and I see it. It's not only that I heard about them, it's just I recorded with my camera.
Thanks, Carolyn. The next one, Edwin, just FYI, folks, if you haven't seen the chat, Edwin has put a link to the empathy tent in the chat. So if you want to catch that link, you can go learn more about that. And Carrie, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it, Freiberg, asks, did you have a goal in mind and did you reach your goal?
I think I did. The goal was to make my first feature film. So I guess I did that one. And I passed I graduated. The main goal was that. But I think, thank you. I think I learned a lot from this process. I think it took me a lot of years, and I was working closely from pre-production to the last stages of post-production and to even selling the movie. I found a sales agent to sell it, but I have to sell the movie to the sales agent as well. So it's like I was in all the process, and I think my ultimate goal at the end was learning not only how to make a film, but also about the topic that we're, like I said in the beginning, trying to find answers and understand better my reality around me. Back then I was living in California, so that reality, even though I'm not American, that was my reality and my surroundings at least. And I think what happens in the US, like it or not, has a really massive impact in other countries. And also the same thing that's happening here with the division, the political division, is happening in other countries. So I knew that by showing this message, even though it's an American film, if you see this film in Europe or if you see in Latin America, you can still see some things that are similar to what's going on in your own countries. And at the end, it's about the same thing. It's bringing people together.
Great. Thanks, Carolina. So I'm going to ask Donna Murphy. We're just at 9 o'clock Eastern right now. Do we have time to do a few more questions?
Of course, we told people it'd be about 75 minutes, so sure, let's keep going.
Perfect. Let's go for another maybe 5-10 minutes. So Barbara Whiteside asks, after your experience attending protests, do you think they're worthwhile anymore?
Sorry, my English. I don't know what worthwhile means.
Do you think that protests are a good thing for us to do, or did you change your mind about that?
No, I do think, yes, a democracy, I think, I'm not saying violent protest, but a protest, peaceful protest, I think they're very, very important. Are they useful? You never know. Some of them are, because they can have a before and after moment, right? It's one moment in life where this protest really changes everything. Most of the other protests, they're just voices in the air. But I think what I've learned, since you were asking what I've learned, is that the left, and I'm not trying to generalize here because I really don't like generalizing, but I think the left, they do a great job organizing themselves to protest and to demand things on the street. But the right really organizes themselves to get in politics so they create a Tea Party. They don't go and protest and the street, but they organize themselves in trying to do lobby and stuff like that. So there are two different ways to actually have a role, an active role in politics. Are they both on their own enough? No, I think you have to do both. I think when if you think something is unfair and there's injustice, you need to protest, you need to raise your voice and say what you want. But at the same time, just raising your voice is not enough. You have to organize yourself and try to either talk to senators or deputies or whoever is in charge to try to make that pressure something bigger than just a sign.
Thanks. Okay. So Carrie, since you've already asked a question, if you don't mind, I'm going to go to somebody who has not asked a question yet. Deborah Lafferty asks, I'd like to ask Carolina if she could explain a little bit more about Jill Stein's statement that the Democrats were responsible for the rise in right-wing extremism. Could you talk about that, please?
I cannot talk for Jill, but I will say my interpretation of what she says. I think what she's saying is that even right now, some people are telling me that everybody thought, okay, Biden is going to change things. And a lot of people are now saying, well, things are the same, right? It's that the things didn't really change that much. That hope that you had that everything was going to be back to normal, it's not real. So and the same thing happened before, right? So just because Obama was in power, all their policies built some sort of a discomfort or disappointment in society, that it was just showing a happy image, but deep inside there were all these people that were not, and that's not happy about it. And so just by having a nice smile to the camera doesn't really mean that there's not so much chaos behind that smile. And what she's saying, I think it's that they built that up through all those years on the left in power. It doesn't really mean she's a little bit strong, right? I'm not saying that I agree with her by saying that the Democrats were the reason why this right-wing extremism is there. I think the right-wing extremism, like I said, it's been for years in the country, right? It's just that perhaps Trump was the catapult to bring those people up, but they were already having those thoughts during the Democrats in power.
Thanks. Okay, I think we have time for at least one more question. Let's try one more. Mary asks, I remember that the film pointed out correctly that the media profits from divisive stories and sensationalism, which most definitely reduces objective reporting. Do you also believe that there is left bias in the mainstream media?
Of course. Like I said at the beginning, what I've learned is that we're all biased, no matter what. And especially now with social media and everything, because you are receiving, unless you are a very clever person, and and I'm not saying that I'm clever, but I had to do this because I would for the film. I had to I was gonna say this, like our profile, because of algorithms, we receive the information that they think we like. So if we are like, they're following our interests and they are giving us information, news articles or everything that they know I like based on my history of my search, Google search, Facebook search, or everything. So based on that, it's very hard to get and to receive other information that it's not what you already think or what you already like. And for this film, I had to sign and liked many groups that I really disagree with. And I had to like them and participate them to how do you say this in English? To trick Facebook or to trick Google to give me other news that I was not receiving. And it worked. It started showing me all these articles and notifications of information that I will never received by any chance if I wasn't taking the time to like all these groups that I disagree with. And by that, I feel like we're all biased in our own way, and the left has it. And it's being naive or not humble enough to say that we all have that some sort of, like, I think what George Lakoff explains, this worldview that we all have based on our history and our education or the people who we surround with, that all affects. And I think there is bias in both sides. And Peter, which is the other professor in the film, according to his studies, that he says that it's almost equal, not even almost, on one side or the other one.
Okay. Well, let's see. Donna, do we have time for one more, or should we bring it home now?
One more.
Okay, one more question. Fran Park asks, how did you go about finding balance in the stories you presented? Did you have proportion, like 50%, 50% in mind when you were seeking out stories? Were you looking for equal balance between the two sides?
Yeah, that was the main goal from the beginning. I guess that answers the one of
How
the
did
other
you how did you go about finding that balance? How did you do that?
It was the hardest thing, I think, because again, who sees this has its own value, what balance is and what balance is not. So I tried to make it 50-50, but I will say that I tried to, along the way, and I can admit this, to make it 55% more Trump supporters and 45 less blue. Not because I identify better with them, it's just because I thought that it was more of the right that you don't usually see on the media, that it was needed to be shown, I think. Just because of that, because perhaps it's because I was receiving other media that was not from the right? And people from the right were like, well, I actually don't receive anything from the left, so what is it? I just think that it was very hard for me, but at the same time, it was the main idea. And when we did the film, I said at the beginning, originally it was 90 minutes, it was longer. And we showed the film to to test groups. And we did one from the right and then one from the left. And according to we heard their comments and say, look, what did you change? We gave them a survey, and based on those comments, I cut 20 minutes of the film. And in those 20 minutes, I tried to make it more balanced according to what I was hearing from their opinions as well.
Thank you. And Carolina, on behalf of everybody who's here tonight, I want to thank you so much for making that film and for sharing your time with us tonight. You're just amazing. I'm so glad to have met you.
Thank you, and I'm so happy to be here. And if you have any other questions that we couldn't answer, I'm gonna leave my email, and you can always reach to me or the organization of the event, Proxima Centauri Films. That's the company of the film. You can always send an email with any questions, and I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you,
As well
Carolina.
as with your comments. If you had any comment about the film that you didn't have the chance to say it now, please reach out to us.
Especially if they're critical comments.
Especially.
So, Caroline, are you going to type your
Oh yeah, sorry, I'm gonna do it
email
now.
into the chat? Okay, so Caroline is going to type her email into the chat, and I would like to ask our fearless leader, Donna Murphy, to take us home. Donna, final comments?
Sure. Yeah, Catalina, this has been simply a delightful experience.
Thank you for me too.
Spending this time with you. You are just so knowledgeable and honest and just incredible, Catalina. I think that you will go a long way, and I wish you much success in your filmmaking business. We
you.
have not heard the last of you, and please keep in touch with us. Really.
Sure.
Mean it. I also want to thank Dee Endelman for her amazing facilitation job. She always does such a professional, wonderful bang-up job as a facilitator. And also want to thank Janet Sedgley and Luke Phillips for their amazing work behind the scenes. They are the backbone of this production in terms of being Zoom event managers. Now, if you liked what you saw here tonight, and you are not yet a Braver Angels member, I do want to encourage you to join. I put a link in the chat box on how to join. It's just $12 a year. Come on, 12 bucks, right? You can donate more. We appreciate that. But basically, that money goes to support what we have become a huge network. We've come a long way in 4 years. We started with 2 workshops and a few people, and we are now a nationwide citizens organization, mainly run by volunteers, a small paid staff. We're going places too, just like Catalina. We are here for the duration to help to bring America together again. Again, not to change people's minds about the issues, but change our minds about each other and build a house united. So please consider joining us. We would love that. And I'd also want to tell you our next film. On April 27th, we will discuss the 2019 film, The Best of Enemies. The Best of Enemies is based on a true story about efforts to integrate a white school after a fire at a Black school in Durham, North Carolina. It features superb acting performances by Taraji P. Henson and Sam Rockwell, with Henson playing a civil rights activist and Rockwell playing an exalted cyclops of the Ku Klux Klan. This film absolutely demonstrates Braver Angels principles. I love it, and I can't recommend it highly enough. The Best of Enemies is live streaming on Showtime, and Amazon Prime members can get a free 7-day subscription to Showtime. So hope to see you again next month, where we talk about The Best of Enemies. Again, thank you for coming.
Donna?
Yep.
Catalina had something to say, plus we need her email.
Yeah, I just sent it, and I just wanted to answer. One person said, where is the film shown or distributed so they can recommend it? And I just put on the chat that you can go to the website, Trumphobiamovie.com, or the one on the flyer, letslisten.com. And there if you put watch movie, it tells you all the platforms that you can rent it, buy, or stream it. It's just Amazon, Google Play, iTunes, and all that. And thank you again, everybody, especially to Braver Angels organizations, because this was great. And I'm very happy that we did this.
Thank you. Well,
Thank
good night, everyone. Have a good rest
Good
of
night.
your evening.